Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Keeping It Real. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show you are watching / listening to, consuming in some way, of course. Keeping It Real. I'm your host, Gabriel Fast, and with me is our other host, Ethan Maestri, and we are here to talk about / review Star Trek First Contact. So, Ethan, welcome back. It's been a while since we sat down to do one of these for Star Trek, but I told you that this was going to happen. I told you that this was incoming, and, it only took like a year, but here we are. As we like to do with Keeping It Real, we like to just kind of jump right into it. Ethan, you're our resident Star Trek superfan, a fanboy, if you will. Would you consider yourself a fanboy?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Have been since the late 80s. Yes.
Ethan, I'm starting to understand more and more. I was watching Lower Decks with my buddy Elijah Middlesworth. He's been on the show many a time. And we were there, we were relaxing, and we were working. I was working at the same time. It was over Christmas break, but there was Lower Decks on in the background. And I was like, I found myself like chuckling because at this point, I know enough about Star Trek to like understand, kind of get it. So it was kind of cool to like something would hit me and I would ask Elijah, I'd be like, so X, Y, and Z. He's like, yeah, because he's like a super fan also. So it was kind of cool. I was like, I started kind of piecing these things together, and then it started making me understand like why you love Star Trek so much. And I just got to say, like, I'm happy to be back here. I'm happy to do this with you. I'm excited to keep this project going because I feel like, something we were talking about a while back was just not being able to, like, attach, like, your spark to something. And I slowly feel myself starting to feel the static a little bit, you know what I mean, towards Star Trek. Like, I'm actually actively thinking about it now, you know what I mean?
And the really cool thing is we're kind of now getting into that. We're into the silver age of Star Trek. It's that time where we now have two movies. The second one of which we're about to talk about from the next generation, right? And so this is what is commonly referred to as the Silver Age for Star Trek. Because before you had the TOS, 3 seasons of the original series, you had a couple of seasons of the animated series, and then you had the movies, right? From 79 on. And as a Star Trek fan, that's all you had was one crew, one ship, and essentially one series. Now you have Next Generation, a whole 7 seasons of that. And now you've got movies on top of it. And additionally, at this time, when First Contact comes out, you've got Deep Space Nine happening. It's in its 5th season. You've got Voyager. It's in its 2nd season or 3rd season, something like that. And there's just all of this Star Trek that's coming out. And all these different stories, in different parts of the universe. They're not sitting all right on top of each other. It's a wonderful time when First Contact comes out. It's a wonderful time to be a Star Trek fan. And like I was alluding to earlier in the PCP that we did, I was about 16 years old when this movie came out. 16, 17, right in that range. And it was glorious because I went and saw the movie, and then I went home that night, and late night was Deep Space Nine in syndication and Voyager after that. So all you had was TV and what you recorded or whatever you had on a VHS. You didn't have TiVo. You didn't have, all of the ways to stream it that we have today. And it was a time when it felt like Star Trek was everywhere and everybody knew what Star Trek was. Whether they liked it or not, that was up to them, but it was there and you could consume it anytime you want, it felt like.
Sidebar to that. So why did it work then, but now it's not working with Star Wars and all these other things, that all these shows are coming out right on top of each other at all these different time periods and all this different subject matter? It obviously worked then, right?
Yeah.
Why is it not working now?
I think because the difference was like for me, for Deep Space Nine, that is my Star Trek. That is my series. That is absolutely hands down the one that I feel like influenced me the most and that I enjoyed watching the most. That said, I didn't see every episode every weekend when they were rolled out. I missed episodes. And so it wasn't until later on that, reruns were showing up that I got to catch up on some of those episodes that I saw. And that just increased my love for Deep Space Nine. And by that point, Voyager was finishing up, and the only Star Trek that was out there was the last of the Next Generation movies and Enterprise, and that was it. So it was obvious that Star Trek was tailing off, right? You had repeats, you had syndication, and eventually I did buy the DVDs and watched the entire Deep Space Nine series back to back several times. You consumed all of it differently than people consume it today. People consume it and they might get a little bit into it, but because it's always there, they feel like they can walk away from it anytime they want. And it's going to still be there and they can come back to it. But what happens is you get interested in this other thing and this other thing and this other thing. Or maybe this last episode you watched just didn't have the pizzazz that you thought it should have. And suddenly you're just down on the whole series. But because it's always going to be out there, you can probably tell yourself, yeah, I'll get back to it at some point. But people just don't. And so I feel like just the way that we consume Star Trek then versus the way Star Trek is consumed now, it's fundamentally different. And that's why maybe it doesn't hit with Star Wars or with the MCU or anything else that is trying to do multiple shows at the same time with movies and making it available 24/7.
So you're saying this was essentially a time period where Star Trek basically kind of felt like lightning in a bottle.
It did. Very much so. Yeah.
Okay.
And it also had a lot to do with the people that were in charge of Star Trek at that time, because we talk about it being the Silver Age. When this movie comes out, it's written by Brandon Braga and I believe Rick Berman. And the two of them had kind of been helming Star Trek out of that transition from the old guard that had done TOS and Gene Roddenberry in particular. And now they are bringing it into more modern times. And these guys knew what they were doing with Star Trek. They had a plan for it. And they dispersed that plan over several series, and they put people in charge of those different series that knew what their plan was, and for the most part, colored within the lines. And so it was cohesive and it worked. And as we have talked about, particularly with Star Wars, that's not the management style that's gone into everything that's been produced up to this point. It's come about in a fundamentally different way than the way Star Trek was made back then. People kind of knew what they were doing. It was new to them. We had not seen anything like an MCU or a Star Wars universe per se, the way we see it now and the way we understand it to be in existence now. Star Trek kind of evolved out of nothing. And it just had the right people at the right time, making ultimately, for better or worse in some cases, but ultimately the right decisions that kind of stewarded it forward until about 2002, 2003, when it petered out after Enterprise was done.
Segueing into our review now, thank you for the history on that. We appreciate it. So, Ethan, as usual, I have you do the recap. So you said before you've seen this movie dozens of times. I watched this movie one other time, and the first time I watched it was with you over at your house.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I had never... Yeah, that's been a while. So this was almost like watching it almost like through new eyes and for the first time. Especially, I know more now about pop culture and I know more about Star Trek too. Yeah. So here we are. Give us the skinny on Star Trek First Contact.
Star Trek First Contact. So we are introduced to the brand spanking new Enterprise E, Sovereign class, NCC 1701E Enterprise. It's just come into service. The shiny is still on it. And the new uniforms look rather spiffy, I think. But we find Captain Picard is having a bit of a flashback to his time with the Borg, which, as he wakes up, he realizes the Borg are on their way. And sure enough, a Borg cube is on its way to Earth. So Starfleet decides they don't want Captain Picard there because of his previous engagement with the Borg that we saw in The Next Generation. And believing that he may be compromised or scarred because of it, they tell the Enterprise to stay away. Well, Picard can't handle that, so he flies the Enterprise into the battle, saves the little USS Defiant with Worf aboard, brings Worf onto the Enterprise, and so that's how we get our crew back together. And the Enterprise proceeds to Picard utilizes his knowledge of the Borg to destroy the cube. Well, the cube does launch a small spherical life raft type ship with a few Borg on board, and they go into the past to the year 2063, I believe it was 62, 63, something like that, to just before First Contact, and First Contact being when the Vulcans come to Earth for the first time, because Earth has finally achieved warp flight. Well, the Enterprise crew beams down when they realize that the Borg were attacking a specific site in Montana. It turns out they were trying to destroy the first warp ship that Zefram Cochrane was building. And so the crew spends some time there trying to pick up the pieces and right the wrongs that the Borg have introduced by messing up the timeline. While that is going on Earth, the crew is dealing with a Borg invasion that is taking place on the Enterprise. Some of the Borg escaped the doomed spherical ship and are now converting the Enterprise into a Borg ship. Picard encounters the Borg Queen. They have a bit of a standoff. Data is involved. Data is converted to the Borg as well, at least as best as the Borg Queen can try and tempt him to. But ultimately, Picard, Data, and the remaining crew of the Enterprise prevail, and the Borg are defeated. And First Contact takes place as it was intended to. The end. Oh, the Enterprise escapes home to their own time.
Very nice. That was concise. Man, yeah, I gotta say, there's a lot going on here in this movie, and like I said, I'm deepening my knowledge of Star Trek like little by little. But I gotta be honest, and I really watched this too. I felt lost through some of it. So, yeah, I mean, I was having a hard time kind of keeping track. Like, basically, whenever they went into the different time, like back in the past, that for some reason was lost on me. Like, they said it obviously whenever they're on the ship. They're like, "Oh, this is a whatever the term was they used for it." Like, once we actually get to Earth around that time, I had a hard time keeping the two separate timelines straight on the Enterprise versus what was happening on, where Picard was, in Montana. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, and I just also think that this movie is named so, it's just kind of funny, in my opinion, that they named it First Contact whenever in reality there's not a lot of first, we get the First Contact, but you get what I'm saying? It just doesn't feel like it's appropriately named for the subject matter, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that a thing that people talk about sometimes? I mean,
that's a good question. First Contact obviously is referring to when the Vulcans are contacting the Earthmen for the first time.
Which is at the end of the movie, mind you.
Yeah.
Right.
It is now, looking back on it, a very important event in humanity's history in the Star Trek timeline. A whole series essentially deals with the aftermath of that First Contact. Not aftermath, but the subsequent events as man gets more involved in the greater space society.
Was that Discovery?
No, that's Enterprise.
Oh, okay.
The one with Scott Bakula. Yeah.
Okay.
So, that was dealt with very heavily, and people that followed Star Trek out of the Silver Era are very familiar with the First Contact event and all the events that take place as a result of it. But yeah, in 1996, when this movie comes out, First Contact was not really anything that existed in lore. It was known to have happened. It had been referred to, but it wasn't this big thing so that when you hear First Contact, you immediately know what's being discussed.
Yeah, and I mean, even now, it's I still and I appreciate everything you're saying, but to me, it's just like I said, the subject matter, that's not what the movie is about.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's just funny looking back on it now to where it's
yeah, you have to accept that First Contact is the event that allows the Federation and everything to exist after. It is the linchpin event.
Right.
And so hindsight's 2020. You look at it from that aspect, and it's like, okay, it makes sense to name the movie that. But I can appreciate where you're coming from, and I never really thought about that in 1996. But then again, I was a Star Trek fan. They could have called it, Enterprise blow up, and I'll be there, day one, and
Right.
take my money.
Yeah, I mean, and to say it's like, oh, if that's what this is about, is the first contact, it's like, oh, so the Borg mission is really just a grandiose kind of side quest. Like, whenever you think about it, like we made the B plot like the substance, and the actual A plot is like 5% of the movie. And granted, this is me strictly coming at it like with just thoughts that come to mind. I write them down. I just want to come out and say, like, there was a lot I really liked about this movie. I love Data. Like, Data's the man, especially, just seeing him get flesh. He becomes flesh for the first time, and he's able to feel. Yeah. And just how euphoric that must have felt. It's like everything would have seemed like fireworks, just being touched. It's like, oh my God. Like, imagine being touched for the first time. And, like, the Borg Queen, she was a little freaky deaky with Picard and with Data.
Yeah, that was definitely a whole S&M thing going on there that we don't need to get into.
That was whole. That was the 90s were a weird time. There's a lot of leather. You had First leather. Contract, a lot of Matrix. Yep. I mean, yeah. So, anyways, I do have some notes here. So I appreciate your recap. That was very concise as usual. I appreciate that. So I love the little character things because obviously that's what draws us to Star Trek, or really should draw you to any story a lot of times, like, is the character grabs you. Now, there's times where I might take on a story and like I really fall in love with the character, but then quickly move on past and then fall in love with the world that the show takes place in, or the story takes place in. But Star Trek is one of those ones where I just really enjoy these character interactions and how the storytellers, the creators, they go out of their way to show you and like put little nuggets for you, like little things that like they make decisions and it's like, oh, this connects to that. Did they do this on purpose? And it's like, maybe the conversation that they wanted you to have, that probably wasn't on purpose, but they stuck true to the character in these moments. They give Worf his own crew, and then later on in the movie, like, he's trying to tell Picard how to do his job whenever, like, Picard literally saved his ass. Like, I mean, it was just funny to me. I'm like, and I think I start to understand, like, the archetype of that character even more, and you relate to it because it is always the loudest guy in the room that usually doesn't have the stones or the sand to back it up, whatever's going on. Yeah. And, that was just kind of cool to see that. I really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed Data had a line in there right before they go into the, approach the Borg. Data goes, "Sir, I think I speak for everyone when I say to hell with orders." And this, I'm like, it's an android, and trying to humanize technology is just such a high sci-fi concept, and they deal with it a lot in this movie. Mm-hmm. And it's so crazy how these things are tethered to topical things nowadays, like AI, like we're getting into a time period where stuff's getting weirder and weirder. And I'll be honest, like, I use AI a lot for refinement, for, like a lot of different things. I use it as it's meant to be, as a tool for organization, not for something to try and stand amongst something that's been done by humans. But we are getting to a day and age where you are starting to see kind of this romanticization of technology on a grander scale, to where it's like, oh, people behaving this way, like, something like the Borg, there's more of a possibility for that more than ever now. Like, based on the way that people are fetishizing technology and trying to make it like Ready Player One or like Cyberpunk 2077 or, stuff like we're heading there. Like, and AI is just making it like rapid speed. So I think this movie does such a good job of like speaking to technology on like, no matter what time period you're in, you can look at this and be like, oh, they were already playing with those ideas here. Like, what happens whenever the synthetic and the biological, those cross over too far, Right. And I really do believe Data is kind of like the really wholesome, pure representation of that, Whereas, the Borg Queen, she's more of like not
She's
the evil.
obviously
She is evil, but
corrupted.
yeah, corrupted and delusional and,
Yeah.
like just completely blinded by this idea that this crusade could actually be the thing that is going to be the answer to everything. And,
Yeah.
I love to think that like Star Trek's like Dark Lord, they don't have a Dark Lord, they have the Borg. Like a race that is interesting or a idea that is really interesting to explore, but like whenever it comes down to it, like the very fabric of their being is bad. And, I start to understand now why there was a time where you get mad about like these gray area characters that can't pick whether, there's room for both of it, but at the same time, there is something so nice and refreshing about having something that it's just like, oh, this is trouble. Like, this is not good. Like, we should not want to empathize with this. You know what I mean?
The interesting thing about the Borg in this movie is the Queen, honestly. And in preparing for our discussion here, I went back and I don't think I had ever looked at the extras on the DVD about the production of the movie and the making of, right? And one of the things that they mentioned in there was that they had to do something different with the Borg. The Borg in the television show had been basically faceless and nameless. They spoke with one voice. There was not a queen. That was never an illusion in the television series. They were just this big, bad, monolithic entity that, resistance was futile. They were going to take you over and just absorb your culture as a small part of theirs. And you would cease to exist, except that your memories would continue on in a Borg collective, right? That didn't really work for the movie. They needed a focal point, and that's why the Queen got introduced. It's interesting for the movie, but it actually kind of nerfs the Borg just a little bit, in my opinion.
It makes it seem like they can be beaten. Like,
yes.
Whereas the best evil is the one that you don't know how you're going to overcome it.
It's really hard to make a villain out of a faceless, voiceless throng of individuals that are all of like mind. Because, what they're doing is wrong for us as human beings or as Klingons or Romulans or any other culture because you're just going to absorb us. But the collective is happy or at the very least content and harmonious and unified, and it just steamrolls over all of these other cultures. Well, that's kind of how Western society is done with a lot of other smaller cultures in the world today. Does that make us evil? Well, no, we don't think so.
Right.
So you see,
yet there's plenty of countries that think like we're the empire of evil. You know what I mean? It's all based on perspective and
right.
But
but you start to see why the producers and the writers of this film had to create a focal point so that we could say, yeah, the Queen is evil, and she's leading the Borg in a way that could be construed as evil, and while it works for the movie, it kind of takes the Borg and nerfs them a bit, in my opinion, so that they're not bad. They were never bad. They were just the enemy from the human perspective, right? From the Federation's perspective. And it's kind of hard to make a movie out of that. So I see why they did it, but it feels like kind of a misstep in the Star Trek universe for me.
Well, and had they introduced the Borg super early on in like TOS or something like that, and we had seen
a long struggle,
see this long thing of this mysterious race that keeps showing up, and like they don't know how to thwart them, and like all this other stuff, and like maybe whatever, like then you do have the villain force clearly established,
right?
But
that's why the Klingons worked in all the movies from the 80s.
Exactly, because there was you had that repetition for emphasis, whereas if you haven't seen Next Generation, which I still have not, I've not seen the Borg in Next Generation. This is my only interpretation of the Borg.
Yeah.
It's like, there is a disconnect there for sure, I think, for a lot of people. And, I can totally see where you're coming from and can appreciate your point where it's like by giving them a purpose, it humanizes them further. Thus, it takes away from what like their base idea
Yeah.
even is, which is
It makes them less alien.
yes,
That was the thing about the Borg is how do you deal with this mindless, not mindless. I mean, they all share the same consciousness. How do you deal with that? It's alien. It's different. We don't have an answer for this. Well, now you have a queen. Now we have someone we can talk to, negotiate with, and has feelings that we can manipulate, right? And
right.
you see the difference there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. All good points. I love talking about this stuff. Zephram Cochrane,
Yep.
loved
Yes.
that guy.
Yes.
I established that that's basically Elijah. Elijah Middlesworth, he was supposed to be on this show, but it's not very good. I'm doing my Trump impression. Very, 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 very troubling. Wasn't able to make it. You know,
May he rest in
no,
peace.
yeah, rest in peace. I put
Yes.
Data and Borg Queen equals LOL. So I just wanted to say that out loud.
Yeah.
Um,
If I may,
Go ahead.
Zephram Cochrane, kind of the eccentric Elon Musk character in this particular movie before Elon Musk was a thing, right?
Right.
Doing all the right things for all the wrong motivations, right?
Right.
And that makes for an inherently interesting character.
Well, yeah,
And
and
so, yeah.
me and well, that's actually what that was the next thing I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about Zephram, and then Data, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up. Sadly, we've talked about a lot already. Zephram, whenever we meet him in this place in his life, he's become all these, and all these characters that are from the future, they've lauded him as being this like pioneer and this guy that's like endless possibilities and positivity and anything is possible and da 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 da. And then we get to meet him and he's the complete opposite of that.
Yeah,
And then I started
heroes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then I started, talking to Elijah and I'm like, well, what if that interaction with those people is what actually gave him the spark that he needed to then go on to be this mogul of creativity and genius or whatever? And it's like, it's a paradox, basically.
Yeah.
Because then you get to like a thing of, if they had never gone back, maybe he wouldn't have ever grown into that. Like, that is an idea that is inherently presented within the source material, is like, and I was talking to Elijah about that, and he was like, yeah, I didn't really think about that. But it is interesting to say, like, had they not had that interaction with him, he may not have been the positive guru. But like the whole time they're reiterating all this positive stuff and he's just like, what? What? Yeah. And then it's only whenever he sees it with his own two eyes that he's like, oh my God, like we've really been through something here. And like, yeah, anything is possible type thing. Yeah. You know what I mean?
He starts to see the world where he's had a positive influence on it. And
right.
Therefore maybe he needs to clean up his act just a bit. And he does that. It's interesting that they brought this character in First Contact, because we've actually seen Zephram Cochrane on screen in the original series.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There is an episode where Zephram Cochrane is in that episode, and it ultimately it's the ending point of his life. It's where he is going to spend the rest of his days in this location. The Enterprise crew, Kirk and McCoy and Spock, they encounter him on this planet, and they thought he disappeared a long time ago. He's been dead for years, they assumed. No, he was just crash landed on this planet, transported forward in time for whatever reason. And it's a unique set of circumstances. It's a very interesting episode. That Zephram Cochrane is not who we meet in First Contact, which, if, as you're talking about, this is the point where he becomes the future human, right? The right. More evolved human, the higher thinking human. This is the genesis of it, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, you bring out a great point, and I feel like the writers of the movie did a great job of treating the character with that respect, both of past Cochrane from the original series and the one that we're introduced here in First Contact. There's a reason why he's dreaming about, owning his own island with lots of money, alcohol, and half-naked women, because that's where he's at.
Right.
But after his encounter with the Enterprise E crew in the past, in 2063, he realizes, okay, there's a better future, and I need to help shepherd it.
I have I really do have the ability to help them,
Yeah.
in this whole thing. I can be a contributor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. So last point, Picard and Data, like their chemistry and relationship alone is like enough to make me really want to watch the Next Generation. It's just, it's so endearing, and it's just so like on a molecular level, like chemistry wise, like it's just there, like you buy it. And
look, everything that you're seeing in this movie between Picard and Data, the father figure versus the son, the child, right? And Data very much is a child when it comes to human emotion and knowing his place in human society. All of that exists through the 7 seasons of Next Generation. Picard very much is the father figure for Data. Data is a son to Picard. It's never expressed, but that is the dynamic. That is the relationship, and it's always been there. So yeah, it's gratifying that they were able to draw it out yet again for this movie. They didn't make it all about the action and no heart. The heart is there.
Yeah, and that's evident. And that is really the base of it. It's like we kind of come towards the end of our discussion where it's like, does this movie stand alone? Yeah, it does. I would say it does. I think you could go into this movie, and if you're really paying attention, you can get what you need out of it, and like it's just like a complete, concise story. It's like a super long episode of Star Trek. I genuinely believe that. Do I think that it was heavily like... Do I think that you should have some previous existing knowledge or ideas, about Star Trek before you watch this movie, especially Next Generation? Yeah. Like, it was made for people. Of course, movies are for everybody, right? But you can tell they made this for Star Trek fans and people who know the characters and know the lore. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, man, this just feels weird. And then it hit me. I'm like, it feels like I'm watching TV. And, it was like, and this is probably sounding like I'm like dogging it, and I'm not. But definitely, like, if you don't know much about Star Trek, don't expect this to just blow your socks off, if that makes sense. Because it does have some like pretty climactic moments and some very sharp imagery that was impressive for its time. The special effects are crazy for that time period. Very nuts. Good. Like it looks decent even now.
And to think that was all models. Almost all of it was models.
Are you serious?
Very little CG. Very little CG in this movie.
That makes sense why it still looks so good.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean that just goes to say practical over everything else, everybody. Yeah. I can confidently say I really like this movie, and I would happily watch it again. I feel like the Star Trek movies, they can be those movies like if you invested a lot of your time into watching the show, the movies just feel like you can come to them at any point, and it's almost like revisiting that same vibe, but in a different medium. It's more theatrical. It's more, it just feels like you could revisit it very easily to get more of what you love, but in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, as a Star Trek fan, I always have my top 5 favorite episodes of Star Trek Next Generation. And if I just feel like popping one on and watching an episode, there's 4 or 5 or 6 of them that immediately pop to mind that you can go and revisit because you just enjoyed the story or you enjoyed some of the lore that was drawn out. There's something about those episodes. In the movies, you're absolutely right. It's like going back and watching an episode, a favorite episode, because all of the things that you love in those favorite episodes in some form has probably been distilled and has made its way into the movie as well. And yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. And I mean, I would much rather prefer to watch this over the newer Star Trek movies with Chris Pine, like any day of the week, because I feel like the new Star Trek movies, everything new, like, I don't know, the older Star Trek series, they just have a specific vibe to them, man. And they're not trying too hard to be anything else other than what they are. And I don't know, like, it's crazy that a newer movie or newer Star Trek movie, it's like, yeah, this is entertaining, but it's almost like I'm not having to think, and that's bad. Like,
Yeah.
I like these Star Trek movies because they make me think without me even trying. Like, ideas just come to me and I'm like, oh man, like it makes you think about humanity.
Yeah.
And I just feel like the newer Star Trek movies, which we will get to at some point, and I hope to be wrong. I'm sure there's great moments. There's great moments in every movie. But it's almost like those newer movies are like, hey, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Yeah, we're doing it again.
Pretty cool, right? Yeah, we're going to do it again. Just a
Yeah.
worse version. Just a not as good version, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and, you know, history repeats itself, whatever. But I don't know. There's just something about the 90s, man, that the aesthetic with, you know, special effects and I don't know, like there's something in the water around that time period. And I can't get enough of it. Like this has the same type of energy that like Phantom Menace has for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like just that very
just
same
3 years before that movie came out.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just so good. So
it's interesting to, yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't really thought about that. Just 3 years before Phantom Menace. Phantom Menace is still very much, I mean, there's a ton of CG in that movie, but there's a lot of practical effects in there too. And, and you can see the DNA of the 90s, like you're saying, even in Phantom Menace that doesn't really exist in Attack of the Clones.
No.
But we're not talking about those movies. No, First Contact came at a time, as that movie was being discussed in pre-production, they were trying to find a director for it. And they wanted a big action movie director because, you know, one of the things Patrick Stewart wanted was more action. He wanted to be the John McClane in space, right? But Stanley Kubrick was even approached, if I remember my stories correctly.
For this movie?
For directing First Contact, yes. And he wasn't interested in Star Trek. There was no passion there for it. And so, yeah, it was brought up. It was offered. There was no interest in taking it on. So once they realized, well, no one's interested in doing a Star Trek movie, so who do we get to do this? That's when they tapped Jonathan Frakes, which I feel like was the perfect person to direct this movie because he knows the cast. He is the cast, right? He's worked with them for 7 years.
Did he write the show?
No. Jonathan Frakes, that's Riker. That's the first officer.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. He directed the movie?
He directed this movie.
Oh my gosh.
He had been directing episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. And when Next Generation ended, he went on to Deep Space Nine, and he directed episodes of Deep Space Nine. He directed episodes of Voyager. He directed episodes of Enterprise. He was this prolific Star Trek director in television. So when this movie comes along and they realize we can't get what we want because nobody's interested, well, let's give Frakes a chance. And so he steps in, and I feel like it's why this movie is as good as it is and has the heart that it has. Yeah, it's there's a lot of big moving parts and a way bigger budget, but Frakes was the right person to direct this, and I think that shows very, very plainly in this movie.
Well
because
said.
It still feels like family.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense. I mean, there's usually a good reason why people enjoy working together. It's because there's a chemistry there. It's easy. It's easy to do it because you all speak the same language, and like that makes sense. And that makes sense why, like you said, it does hit this way is because it does. It feels like it's a feeler. Like there's a lot to feel. There's, I don't know.
Well,
There's just it has that.
You said it felt like you were watching television.
Yes.
And I hear that, and I don't receive that as a knock on the movie, right? What I'm hearing is the people that made decisions to put that movie together knew what made the show good.
Yes.
And they just ported it over into 16 millimeter film.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, this has the same structure and feel as like an old... I've seen some of The Next Generation. I just haven't gotten through all of it.
Right.
And it was like, man, this feels like an episode of TNG, straight up. Like, but on, there's more thought gone into it. There's more money that's being poured into it. There's more thought being put into the way the costumes look, and giving it more of like a darker vibe. I mean, there's elements to it that you can tell. It's like, oh yeah, they made it into a movie, but the DNA still makes it feel like an episode of the show.
Yeah. And speaking to that point about the money, I think this was the most expensive until Nemesis comes along in 2002. I think this is the most expensive Star Trek movie to date that has been made. For the 80s films, the studio was notoriously tight on the purse strings because of what happened in Motion Picture, the first movie. And so for here, with the moderate success of Generations, the studio said, okay, we'll give you more budget. And it's interesting to see where they went with this. Just the other night, 2 nights ago, I watched the old Star Trek Next Generation episode Q Who, which is the episode that introduced the Borg into Star Trek lore. And it's really interesting to see the black leotard uniforms with rubber tubing on these suits that these guys are wearing and just the plain white makeup. To see them go from a comical presentation of cybernetic life to what we get with a budget in First Contact, and it's night and day. They were scary. They looked scary. They looked real. They didn't look fake at all. And not just there, but in other areas, and where they did have CGI, it was done really well. Industrial Light and Magic, does the effects for this movie as well. That's the only ones that they should ever go with because it looks amazing. And so it was gratifying to know that the studio released the money was spent well, and it made a lot of money and made the studio very happy in 1996 when it came out.
And here we are almost 20 years later still talking about it.
Yeah, it's still a relevant film.
I mean, everything, all good things must come to an end, but the fact that something can live on 20 years past like its initial, its initial release that's impressive. I mean, how many times have we talked about Avengers Endgame?
0.
Not one time. Not once.
Since it came out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, just puts it into perspective. Star Trek is where it's at, and I'm glad that we were able to watch First Contact. So, here we are again at the end of another show. I'm sad to be wrapping it up, but we have another podcast to record right after this. Or not a podcast, but we have another meeting to be in right after this. We're going to throw some dice tonight and do a little RPG work. So
sounds good.
I'm excited to do that. Thank you for your time, Ethan. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to Keeping It Real. And definitely stay on the lookout. I mean, we're gonna keep this going. Don't know when, but it'll happen. So what's the next on our list? Is it Nemesis?
Insurrection.
Okay, Insurrection.
Star Trek Insurrection. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much again. We appreciate your support. And Ethan, again, thank you for your time. So until next time, folks, say goodbye, Ethan.
Live long and prosper.